Welcome to you all as you join us for yet another experience of the PPMA Sparkle and Learn series of webinars. And it's always a great joy to have colleagues from Penna to join us. Penna are one of our prime sponsors of PPMA, great partner to work with over many years, and have been really supportive to the PPMA community over the lockdown period. So a huge thanks and welcome, Julie Towers, the Managing Director from Penna, to have you back. Julie, thank you for joining us today. And as ever, I always like to kind of start with a little off-piste question for Julie that I haven't primed her on. So this year I've been asking people something that they've appreciated from their week. So Julie, is there something that you would like to share with us that you really appreciated from the week that you've had? Something that's happened to you that's been good? And you're on mute, by the way.
Yeah.
Sure.
So much. Something that I've appreciated this week. Oh, no, good one actually. A HR benefit for the first time. I've used my Bupa Private Health from my fabulous HR policies that I never really valued and used, touch wood, fortunately. But because of the situation at the moment, I needed to go and have some physio, and I've not been able to go, obviously, but my Bupa centre is just across the road from where I live, which I never knew either. So good HR policy coming into action, and reminded me actually, because I often talk about employee benefits with my HR director, very rarely think about the impact of them on the employee, but to be able to go nip across one evening and get myself sorted out and my workplace do that for me made me really think about how we perhaps take for granted sometimes the total reward package. Topical, and it was a good one this week because my back was killing me.
Well, thanks for sharing.
I need a better chair.
Yes, I hope your back gets better soon. And I'll give you a few tips on posture as we sit. It's something that we do every morning in PPMA Mindful Broadcast. Yeah. So posture is hugely important as we spend so much time in front of our screens at the moment. However, that's enough from me. I'll see you at the end of this program. Julie, over to you to welcome your team for today.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Leith, and thanks to PPMA again for partnering with us on this learning experience journey that we've been on over the last year. And it literally is almost a year, Leith, since we did the first one. So it's don't think we anticipated being still in lockdown a year on. So it's great to be able to come back and talk about the learning we've experienced over the last year. I was just saying to the team, it's International Day of Education on Sunday, so it seems very appropriate to keep sharing our learning, because it's how we sort of educate and improve ourselves. So I'm delighted to invite and introduce to you three great teams today. First of all, we're going to talk to Councillor Ian McCord, who is the leader at the very new West Northamptonshire Council. Still not quite live yet, are you, in 1st of April? Ian and his team across North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire, as you all will know, Northamptonshire County Council has been recreated into two fabulous new unitaries, and they took the plunge this time last year with us to say we want to recruit the top teams just as we were hitting lockdown. So some really interesting decisions and challenges for them. So I'm delighted to introduce Councillor Ian McCord to kick us off, and then I'll be handing over to Deborah Simpson and Vicky Jameson from Cambridge City Council, who did a very brave recruitment of a new chief executive through lockdown in a very interesting and blended way, and I'm really pleased that they're here to talk to you about their experience. And then I'm going to hand over to Piali Das Gupta, who herself has recruited in lockdown and has been recruited in lockdown. So hopefully three different experiences and views, but lots for us to learn from. And as usual, questions through the chat, and we'll leave some time at the end to do that. So without further ado, I'll invite Ian McCord, who is dressed from the waist upwards today, which is always good. We always did a check when we were doing our panels, didn't we, Ian? What have we got on our feet? What have we got on our top parts?
Yeah.
Did it with great humour and spirit. So thank you for joining us, Ian. I know Helen's going to share some slides when you're ready.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you all for attending and wanting to get whatever insight you think I might be able to provide in terms of our recent experience of recruiting a top team. I said to Julie when she asked me to do this, I said the presentation needs to be called "Interviewing in My Carpet Slippers," because basically, with that one weird exception, that was probably to a large extent a lot of it was the same. So I've stuck with that theme and said this is going to be called "Interviewing with My Carpet Slippers." Brief introduction from me. I'm the current leader of South North Hants Council and the leader of the West North Hants Shadow Authority. If you want to circulate these later, my details are on there. We move on to the next slide. Just a brief context of where we were. So we had 7 district councils in North Hants and the county council. Just for the purpose of trying to make it graphical, all the 3 in blue are going to move into become West Northamptonshire. The 4 in green are going to be made North Northamptonshire, and all of the responsibilities in that of Northamptonshire County Council, which I've done every other letter of, will be also moved into split across evenly between West and North. And the responsibility for the children's part from the county has been spun off into a children's trust. So that will be our new governance from the 1st of April. So if we go to the next slide, the timeline that we were working to, well, it all started in August. It probably started even before that, but by back end of 2019, we were awaiting a structural changes order, which was being held up because of all the Brexit shenanigans and the general election and so on and so forth. So we got to roughly about February last year, and we finally got our structural changes order, and we thought this is all good, we're there. And then by about April, we had another tweak to the structural changes order, because the original plan was that we were going to stand for election in 2020. The shadow authority would be elected, and the shadow authority of 93 members, a mix of old and new probably, would then set up the new authority. Instead, they mashed together the 132 existing members and said, you lot are going to have to do it, and you can elect the council in April 21. So that's more or less where we are. The shadow authority met for the first time in June. The Children's Trust went live in November. And the important bit is that 31st of December deadline was that the structural changes order, the law that governs all of this, said you must have your top team in place, at least the appointments made, by the 31st of December 2020. And I say, top of the slide, 69 days to go. So we called then on Julie, probably about this time last year, maybe the very back end of 2019. We'd had a discussion around the necessary procurement bits and pieces, but Julie and Penna were identified as the group. We needed to get a senior team, and in fact, for all of these positions that you see, double them up, because there's one for the north and one for the west, and the whole way down. The only one that wasn't doubled up was the Director of Children's Services, which we had made a decision that we were going to share. The 5 in bold are the statutory officers. They were the ones that were subject to the 31st of December deadline. So everything then was done by Zoom. I think, Julie, we may have had one meeting in Northampton, but I can't remember whether we were all in the room and you were on the phone. I think that was actually the case. There was one meeting that we had. I remember all sitting around the table. You were on the phone and we were in the room. And after that, then that was about the end of it, which must have been maybe late Feb of last year. So everything then that we did virtually, and that included that Shape the Future piece was the advertising concepts that we put together, the design concepts. The long listing, short listing, the whole process all went through, and I spent quite a number of hours speaking to various would-be candidates, some of whom did make the grade, some of whom I'm probably scared of. But we got to the next. You can move on to the next one. Our process was send us a video, and then we do the interviewing. Now, what I found quite interesting was the same comments came through whether you had recruited, because I'd worked with Julie before when I did a lot of work with Cherwell, and we'd done a management restructure there and new chief executive and whatever, and Julie recruited those for us, and we got the same comments, not always from the same people, but why didn't he or she dress up a bit more special for that? The same type of things that you were still getting on these videos. It was interesting, the number of people in the selection panels were saying you can see their personality coming through. You know, I was turned off within the first 10 seconds after they opened their mouth in that video. Why is that person doing that video from the office? Why are they not working? It was just interesting to listen to some of the maybe unconscious bias, whatever, but you were interested to listen to some of the comments that were coming through that were already beginning to influence the selection panels time. You know, comments about sticking to time. I said, you know, we said to people, give a 10-minute video, and 10 minutes range to, was it a 5-minute video? I can't remember, but for a lot of them, there were quite a number that ran 3-4 minutes over. And the comments were, this wasn't a rehearsal. You could have done it 6-8 times if you wished to. So if there's any candidates on there, just bear that in mind, particularly for panels that will have to listen to 6 or 7 of these. If it's 10 minutes and everybody runs over by 3 or 4, suddenly the hour we set aside becomes an hour and a half. But our interviews then proceeded as normal. And in trying to do that, we did actually, you know, say if we were turning up at a physical meeting, the dress code would be the same. As I said, shirt and tie, trousers optional, and carpet slippers. And it was mostly from the top up. I would say there's a couple of bits for anybody doing the interviews. Just bear in mind the next panel, the next slide, you can see this is our panel in action. I have hidden the face of the candidate to preserve the guilty, but you can see, look at the great intensity there with which that panel is listening to the candidate. If you look at the one on the top right, you can see the top of his head. It's just one of these things where at the moment I'm standing up, and Julie, that's the best way to help you back. Get a standing up and down desk. You can look straight at the camera, but when you're actually writing notes as the candidates are talking, all you actually get to see is the top of their heads. And I don't know how we solve that problem, but I just sort of mentioned to the candidates, don't be put off by the fact that you can see there, actually, a lot of people are looking down in the way, but they're probably actually making notes and not looking completely disinterested in where we're at. So it's just something to bear in mind, or at least set candidates at rest, because you could look at that and say, well, that candidate's having a massive effect on the panel there, but that may not necessarily be the case. So again, our whole interview process, and maybe the others who've recruited the chief executive, it was very similar. We had a 2-day for the chief, certainly. We had a 2-day, move on to the next slide. We had a 2-day event for this, where we had 3 or 4 stakeholder panels of members, voluntary sector, key partners that fed in, as well as the actual recruitment panel. And what was quite interesting for a lot of the recruitments that we did, you could still see, although it was virtual, what happened when the unexpected happened. We certainly had one candidate who had put all their notes on an iPad. The iPad had a problem. The candidate didn't have the notes and literally died on their feet. I'm reluctant to say he or she because I don't want anybody to be able to trace some of these things back, but it was really interesting. And I think then the panel took the view, you know, you're here to give us a 10-minute presentation on your specialized subject, which is one of those 5 key areas. And if you can't do that, whenever you get mixed, you know, hit with something a little unexpected. So you don't think that the sort of things about how do you draw people out, how do you judge them, can you do it? We found it was just as easy online as it was offline, you know, in a room to do it. And we probably had between us, I'd say, 15 days of interviewing on Zoom between both ourselves and Northants. Certainly Julie's team must have had a lot of time between herself and David doing a lot there. So post-interview assessments is my next slide, and you know, there was no different. We had the same range of views. We had the same people saying their personalities did or did not come across. The answers were all assessed, and the psychometrics were fed in, and the panels, all of that was all the same as we would have done had we all been sitting in a room. The only difference was that we weren't in place. So we now have, on the next slide, a whole senior management team. Those in bold are in post. They're working. The other 2 that are not in bold in the middle are yet to start, but they have been appointed. The top two, Anna and Martin, and the bottom two, Jane and Rebecca, they're sort of internal hires. But the thing is common to all of them, I haven't since March met a single one of them physically or face to face. I haven't shook the hand of a single one of them. So I have recruited this whole team with the help of Julie and a lot of others, and frankly, we've done it all virtually. I've never managed to leave, never needed to leave the house, never managed to leave the house. Most of our candidates were from home. There was a few that did interviews from offices, but that had usually something to do with stability of internet, or wanting to make sure that the dog didn't spoil their chances, or the cat didn't get in the way, or their 4-year-old didn't get in the way, or sensible, practical considerations that we're doing because they realized that they too were in that position. So I would say to anybody, this is not something we should throw away. I think we should be looking at these types of arrangements. Certainly, maybe the early stages of interview. I'm certainly a big fan of these type of Zoom meetings, and I do think if they're handled properly, it is certainly possible that you can still get the measure of candidates. You can still work out whether you think you'll be able to work with these people or not. And there's nothing really to hold us back from doing it. So my last slide is just questions. Anybody wants to ask anything, more than happy to take it.
Ian, thank you so much. That's great. I'll probably just run on to the two next speakers if you're okay, and then just so I don't run out of time. There are a couple of bits which is good, but thank you so much. It is great to get a political view. We often forget the politicians sort of have the same issues and sort of keenness to get it right as the officers, and it was really great to have such a connected leader. I have to say, Ian put a lot of time himself into this recruitment process. He spoke personally to every candidate on his hourly walks in the evening, and never gave any of them less time than the others. So thank you, Ian. Okay, so we'll move on to Deborah Simpson and Vicky Jameson, who are from the Cambridge City Council HR team. Deborah's head of HR there, and Deborah and I felt like we'd sort of worked together forever this last part of the year. Deborah, I think we spoke every day, which was great, but a really interesting story about recruiting their new chief executive. I don't think it's actually started yet, have they, Deborah? So it'd be good to hear from you. So over to you two.
Afternoon, and thank you. I'm Deborah Simpson, I'm head HR at Cambridge City, and with me is Vicky Jameson, who's our recruitment manager. We worked through the second round of appointment for a chief exec with Penna, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we did. And I'm grateful that we've just followed Councillor McCord, because a lot of what he's talked about, I was smiling because it's a parallel for us. So I'll try and pick up on some of the things that he was talking about. So we started kind of the go live on the 1st of October with our website. And that was kind of the bit where we said, we're recruiting again for a chief exec. And we put a lot of work into the website. It was really important to us to say to the candidates what we were looking for, to give them as much information as we could about what we were doing and our process. I mean, we backed that up with some online advertising, MJ, Guardian and LinkedIn and others. The big thing for us was the Penna search. Because we were going the second time, we really wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to candidates. So our online advertising and the website was all to drive people to those conversations. And during the course of that kind of weeks when we were out live advertising, there were chats with the leader that were on offer. And we saw a lot more people take that up this time. And that was an important part of our process. So 3 very intensive weeks for Penna. I think Julie was reaching out to everyone, everywhere, to kind of drive people towards our recruitment process. We got to the point where we had a number of candidates come forward, good, healthy representation across our long list. Penna assisted us in kind of categorising that. Our long listing process is with members. We have an appointment subcommittee, and they are very much involved in the recruitment process and wanted to interview all of the candidates at the long listing stage. And that was a sort of 45-minute technical interview around the priorities for the role. So things like climate change, transformation, financial management, really wanting to see where the candidates were with that process. We then shortlisted down to a number of candidates who went through to the assessment stage. And this is where it got really intensive for the candidates. So they'd had their virtual interview, they'd got through that with the members, and then we put them through what turned out to be about 2 weeks of very intensive online exercises. And I think this is probably why Julie's keen for me to talk to you. Someone described it as an assault course, but it was really important for us to see the candidates in a range of different activities, doing lots of different things, and to see where the consistencies were, to find out things about them that maybe they hadn't quite thought were going to come through, to give them a really good sense of who we were and what we were about and what we were looking for in our chief exec, and that two-way process of them really getting to understand Cambridge City and what was important to us. And this was all virtual. Took a tremendous amount of organising and planning by us and by Penna and by the candidates, and a great deal of flexibility on their part as well. You know, these were all senior people doing jobs. COVID pandemic was in the next phase, you know, so we were having to be responsive and enable them to participate in this and give as fully as they possibly could. So we had a staff panel. That was the first thing that they had to do as part of the assessment centre. And we've never done a staff panel before, so this was kind of new and risky for us. And we involved the trade unions. But it was one of the things that the candidates came back with later on and said they'd really enjoyed and found really useful. And they kept referring in their discussions with members to their staff panel and what they picked up. They had a meet and greet with senior management, which was heads of service and strategic leadership team. And again, that was virtual. They met partners. So City like Cambridge, we have a range of really key partners and chief execs from other councils. So they had partner panel and there was feedback from that. They had a written exercise to do, which was timed. So they got the exercise, they had an hour, they had to produce their paper and send it back. We did the psychometrics, the wave, the Hogan, the verbal numerics, and something, you know, we learned a long time ago was verbal and numeric skills are quite important. It's worth testing them. Don't assume that they're there. Media exercise. So they got a scenario. They had time to prepare for that. That was filmed, reported back. Presentation to all councillors. So they had a lunchtime session where they delivered a presentation. All councillors were invited and we had a really good turnout. The panel were also there. It was a lot of engagement in a very short period of time. We had some fixed days where certain things were happening on certain days, but it was all arranged around that kind of 1.5 to 2 week period. Really intensive for the candidates, but we needed to respond to their availability, given it was a really tough time. We then had a further shortlist, and then they got to the bit that was different. So we have what we call a meet and greet. So for the final candidates, they came to Cambridge, and we had a kind of one candidate, one councillor walk around the Guildhall, which is a kind of big square building, and the Market Square, kind of organised, one in, one out, socially distanced. And that was really important for the candidates and the members. Our members wanted to see the candidate. So the way that we've kind of arranged to do this is what we call the meet and greet, the one-to-one chat and discussion. Members went off to participate virtually, and the candidates had individual rooms in the Guildhall. You know, it's a large building, socially distanced, and then took part in their interview. So by the time we got to the end of that day, members had a tremendous amount of information that had been fed back through all these processes. They'd participated in a number themselves, starting from the long list interview, but they'd actually met the candidates. So we were finally able to get to a point where a recommended candidate was selected, executive notification, and then off to council. And we keep a confidentiality until we get to our council meeting. Just a couple of things to say from our point of view. Virtual interviewing at this level, tremendous amount of organisation required and flexibility and contingency planning for the inevitable IT failure. You know, it did happen to a candidate in the middle of their presentation. And it is a test of how they cope with those situations. We found the process kind of really engaging, and all of the candidates, including the ones who weren't appointed, said to us they'd enjoyed it. They'd found it engaging. They'd found it really useful to get to understand the council. You know, they knew they'd had opportunity to give their best. They'd been put through their paces, and we really felt we understood their style, their approach, their personalities were coming through. So we felt we knew what we were getting by the time we got to the end of that process. And more importantly, the candidates knew whether, if they were offered the job, they were going to accept it. So having done it once earlier in the year, second time, and we had to have an interim process as well. So I feel as if I've done 3 rounds of chief exec recruitment in 2020. Our new chief exec is due to start in April. So hopefully that will be it for a while. But would we go back? No. No, we wouldn't. And we found a way to include the element of kind of a meet and greet as well, which was important to us. So, and I think Vicky will share as well that a lot of what we learned through all of this, we've taken into our other recruitment processes. If you can make this work at chief exec level, then you can make it work in other parts of your recruitment, is the kind of what I think we've learned through that. So I don't know whether Vicky would like to add anything, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, just to echo what Deborah said really about the flexibility and how that's important that we show that as the kind of organisation we are. And certainly during these times, we're encouraging our other recruiting managers to kind of use these methods and to not necessarily have that pressure on the one day, one interview, everybody in a room, which, yes, we know interviews and that process is nerve-wracking, but being mindful of, you know, these are people, these are, you know, people with other things going on, and particularly at this time, that's important for us to demonstrate that kind of that side of the kind of organisation we are. But just to sort of give you a flavour, I don't know if Deborah mentioned, but the number of people that we were coordinating sort of was in excess of 50 people, not all at one time, which that would have, but you know, throughout that process was in excess of 50 people. But as Deborah said, will we go back? No. Previously, this sort of process would have been perhaps over only 2 or 3 days, would have been on site, and that, you know, tremendous pressure then, but to space it out and to use Microsoft Teams and to have that virtual element and build up to the meet and greet worked really well. And you know, some of that stuff is becoming business as usual for us in our recruitment processes now. So yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. Vicky, thank you so much. And I think, you know, a good learning point for me, and I've been recruiting a long time, but you never it reminds you of the need to be iterative. I think online has made us realise that actually, because we're working like this, people haven't got the time to give to 1 or 2 day processes. They've got slivers of time, but you can use it to your advantage. Deborah was very bold, I thought, in going back to her panel and saying, these candidates need more time. These stakeholders need more time. We actually did a second run for some candidates with stakeholders to satisfy ourselves and to test again. And candidates, even though it was another exercise for them, actually said how helpful it was to them. So I think the ability to do things quickly online has given us that option to really keep testing and retesting in the same way Ian did with his team. That if we were unsure, we paused and said, let's have another 30 minutes, let's have another hour. So I do think it's given more options. Thank you both. And last but by no means least is Piali Das Gupta, who has been recruited in lockdown and is recruiting herself now in lockdown. So Piali, over to you.
Lovely, thank you so much. And actually, thank you, fellow panelists. That's been really rich insight. If I ever go for a chief exec job, I feel like I've got a little bit of a head start in my prep now. So I've just recently been recruited, thanks to Penna, actually, to the Director of Communications and Policy and Communications role at Newham, and I'll be starting in a couple of weeks. And that was my third, I think, executive sort of, you know, that kind of tier of job, but my first done entirely online and through the sort of the digital medium. So I think it helped a little bit that, you know, that process of going through what felt like a gauntlet of interviews wasn't entirely new to me, because jobs previous to that, you know, it's always been that single interview, either you get it or you don't. So I'd never, you know, my first one like this was Birmingham, where you know, there was 4 rounds of different types of interviews. So that helped a little bit. And I guess what I would say to any candidate who's going for their first sort of exec level job is take the advice of the recruiters about how to prep and how to keep your stamina up through all of that, because actually pacing yourself through four rounds of interviews where some of the questions will duplicate, and you want to stay authentic and you want to keep your passion up. Actually, that's not that easy, and it gets even more difficult when you're doing it through a screen and you don't entirely feel a bit one-dimensional, and then the people you're looking at feel one-dimensional. So just some thoughts on that. So my process was 4 interviews. I was lucky in this case because I knew the recruiting manager from previous sort of professional circles. I had contact with the mayor, who was ultimately the person that this role sits under, really, in terms of cabinet responsibility. So that helped a little bit. And I think, again, if they don't offer an opportunity to have a quick conversation in advance and just build a bit of rapport and build just a sense of each other, really, that fit sort of sense, Penna was always really happy to facilitate that. So if they don't offer it, don't hesitate to ask, because actually if they don't offer that time, that may tell you a little bit about what they're like as an organization as well. And I guess before I launch too much more into kind of some of my reflections on the process, I really do believe as a candidate that it's a 2-way interview process. You are interviewing the organization as much as they're interviewing you, and it's got to be a 2-way fit. You can't serve them well, and they can't actually help you grow and stretch and do your job well if that fit's not there. And I think that's even more important at senior level jobs, with that fit just becomes so critical when you're tested, and those difficult moments happen, that you need to know you've got each other's backs and you have that rapport. So my remarks kind of break down into what's maybe a little bit different because of the world that we're working in, and then what's not really different at all, but maybe you just need to tweak a little bit in the nature of an online universe. So I thought a lot prepping for my interview about sort of what are my strengths in an interview, what feedback have I had through previous interviews, and one of them is that I'm generally considered a pretty lively, emotive speaker, and sometimes that's easier to have come through in a room when you've got people right there and your physical energy is felt, and you're making eye contact, you're reading the non-visual cues. That's a little bit harder on screen. But one of the things, like just basic things like leaning in towards the screen, making that effort to make eye contact even though you might be looking at the top of the head, you can sometimes catch a glance, and that just personalizes you a little bit, I think. So that's what I thought about. That was one of my strengths. Other people might be much more low-key, matter of fact, and there's another way to play that into sort of an online interview. But I've recently, for one of the roles on my team, interviewed somebody who, his answers were good, but he was flat. He kind of sat back, kind of looked at his keyboard, and it was just really hard to get a sense of him. And I kept thinking, this isn't enough for me, because you've got a fairly senior role on my team, and I need to know that you've got the chemistry to hold a team and to kind of lead a team. And it sounds a bit unfair, but he just wasn't exuding that. The content of the answers was right, but the presentation just wasn't what I needed it to be to lead a team. And hopefully I'll get a chance to offer that feedback to him, because actually he was a good candidate, and we were lucky that we had a really stellar one that we offered the role to. We've all talked about the technical difficulties. One thing I would say is maybe don't beat yourself up as a candidate if you do get that occasional Wi-Fi's dropped out, cats jumped on the keyboard, your kid needs a cuddle because they're home, and they just do. And I've watched that happen to panelists as well. So not just the candidate, but actually, I was on an interview panel recently where at one point, both of the other panel members, their Wi-Fi dropped out, so they dropped off the screen entirely. One had both the child and a cat crawl onto her lap at the same time, and it was great. Do you know what? The candidate gave the child a wave, asked the cat's name, took it in his stride, and it was brilliant. It really showed something, I think. But equally, we had a candidate who, he's in a shared house. He was actually sat on his staircase with this sort of laptop balanced on his knees. And, we just really wanted him to know that we weren't judging him for that he didn't have like a desk set up and everything. So I think there is something about giving each other a break in this environment where we're all working under very, very similar conditions. So I do think plan your backups, make sure that your battery on your laptop is charged in case, your thing is cut out. I always make sure that I know very quickly how to connect my laptop to Bluetooth on my phone. So in case my Wi-Fi drops out, I can keep connected that way. So, little tips like that, whatever the backup is for you. But don't beat yourself up if there are technical problems. We're all learning about this world that we're working in. And then so the bits then I think that don't change at all, and I think but maybe take a little bit more ingenuity in this world, especially I think when you're going for a local government role. knowing the place really matters. And the great thing about the way we're recruiting right now is that it's opening up possibilities for me, certainly, to apply for jobs in places that I wouldn't necessarily invest that much in the beginning. So again, like going back to the Birmingham experience, it was a full day out of my schedule when I did the interviews. Like every round of my interviews meant one full day out of my schedule because I had to travel up and travel down, and then the time to prep and everything. This is brilliant, right? Because maybe it's an hour and a half of your day, and you can kind of go on with the rest of your day if you need to work and things. So that does open up possibilities. But I still think, and Councillor McCord, you might be able to actually vouch for this, I especially think for elected members who are really passionate about their places and about their places, I think they like to know that you at least spent some time doing your homework about the place. And so when I interview for, I apply for a job, I like to spend a bit of time in that place to understand what it feels like, what it looks like, the walking around bit to get the flavor of the place. That's not so possible under lockdown. So I spent a lot more time looking at the local papers, looking at YouTube videos, just to get a sense of the place. Because I just think in a local government job, if you can't show that commitment, that's going to come through certainly to residents when you start doing that job, that you're not very committed to the place. And then the last one, again, is like with any interview, but I think matters even more in this world, which is just to rehearse your answers to the questions that you almost certainly can anticipate. And that's important for any kind of interview, be it face-to-face or whatever. But I think especially on this on-screen sort of world, because you're not picking up on the non-visual cues like people fidgeting in their seats and just kind of they've stopped taking notes because they've got enough and they don't need any more from you. It's a little bit harder to pick up on that in screen. So I think making sure that you've got your flow and you've got like a really tight answer to give is really important, especially to the questions that you can predict, because there is a kind of a tendency, and I experienced this last week, just to waffle on and on because you just haven't picked up on the cues. So I'm just going to stop there. Like, I actually think this is brilliant because as a candidate who's still kind of thinking about, for future moves, this has opened up a world of possibilities to me that I might not have considered otherwise with the, the commitment I might have taken. And certainly now as a recruiting manager, it opens up a talent pool for me that I might not have had access to.
Thank you, Piali. Very true. It really is changing the access, and I think with agile working that will increase even further. Thank you all to all of our presenters. Great insights and learning. Just a couple of quick questions while we've got a few minutes. Ian, a question earlier was about the sort of process you ran in Northamptonshire. Obviously, it's a big restructure, and a question was about whether you opened the roles just to internal candidates or you opened it up nationally. Obviously, I'm aware you opened it up nationally. What was the sort of driver behind that?
Yeah, and I saw that as sort of why. Well, there's probably two reasons for it. For anybody that might understand some of the history of Northants, let's just say there's a lot of baggage, and it was probably the easiest way to make sure that nobody was accused of this council taking over that council or that council being taken over by them, whoever them happened to be. So that was the first bit. The second bit, of course, is that whilst I do know that we have, and I said 4 out of the 8 there are from existing authorities. What I think and what we all wanted to make sure was that even if you have a very good internal candidate and we've put them up against the best that is available at the time, at least everybody is assured, and the candidate, that it wasn't a shoe-in. It wasn't just because you happened to be mates with the leader or anything like that. It was you got it on your merits because you were genuinely the best person that Penna could find for us on the time during the recruitment time, within the salary brackets we were prepared to pay, etc., etc. So everybody can say we've managed to get the best answers. So we were very keen to do a national recruitment. Now, I think as we move further down, I don't know where you're helping out with some of these ones now into the sort of tier 3 areas. I think a lot of those then are more ring fenced, but then I think we've also got to be a bit more respectful of employment law and redundancy situations and all sorts of other tricky areas that I steer well clear of.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Ian. Thank you.
Are you an HR lady?
Did you hear that, Piali?
Your background HR, yes, you know what I'm talking about. All that.
I'm policy all the way.
She's policy all the way.
Minefield of sort of
absolutely.
alternative employment and all that, and you can imagine what that's like now, moving together 3.5 organizations to create a new one, and there's going to be a lot of sort of 3 into 5, 3 into 1 doesn't go.
Yeah, the thing probably to add, Ian, of course, is that you've been a superb employer. Both authorities and the county have invested in career transition workshops, development, CV development. Everybody's had the opportunity to have a consultant conversation. We're doing career coaching. And so, I mean, I think there'll be some people have chosen to go earlier and looked at new opportunities. I think most people from the old, the old structures are being given a really good opportunity to find new careers, or if not, support. So it's been a good process.
And one of the things
do you want?
was important to me was particularly those who had long service. So there was some of the people who had long service with some of the individual authorities who applied, and there was the odd comment maybe from member colleagues about, oh, well, their application didn't look as good. And I was of the view, well, hang on a minute, just because you've been working here for 20 or 25 years, what you're actually now doing is penalising loyalty, because if you've had 20 years experience, 20 years continuous service with one of the authorities, I'm more than happy to accept that maybe your CV writing and application form skills are a little rusty if you haven't done it for 20 odd years. So we did try and do bits like that to get either Penna or others to try and even that up, because again, we're all very aware, whether you do it virtually or physically, you can get the person comes along and they look like the greatest things in sliced bread, and then you realize when you've recruited them that they're actually no better or probably worse than some of the talent that you already had and you let go.
Very true. Thanks, Ian. Deborah, just a quick one. So, a question about diversity, and an obvious question about the focus of diversity. I know Cambridge City particularly had that as a very high priority in their both political priorities, but also in the recruitment. We've talked before on these sessions about the positive impact that online recruitment seems to be having. I'm sure we'll learn later as well, and the data might hopefully tell us it is improving the outcomes. Any thoughts around that?
It was one of the very strong briefs that we gave Penna for the executive search, that we wanted them to reach out, not just the sort of traditional focus around local government, but we wanted to look at other sectors where we were particularly aware that there may be more diversity of candidates. And it was part of the brief that was given to Penna was to do that. And it was also part of the reason why we invested very heavily in the time to do the website and as much information as we possibly could, and spreading the network of people who might pick that up and see that. So yes, as part of our recruitment and selection strategy, and then inevitably as we were going through the recruitment the selection exercise as well, being very mindful of any adjustments that we needed to make for all of the parties that were involved, and there were a large number of them at various stages. So yes, I would, to the person who's asked the question, it was key to us from the very beginning and all the way through to the end.
Good.
Really, can I come in on the diversity point for a moment? Do you mind? So, as a BAME candidate, one of the things that I think, and I've kind of been both a candidate and a recruiting manager who's put a premium on diversity in my pool as well. We can make it easier, I think. And Julie, you very kindly, when I was in between roles at a certain, or about to leave a role a couple of years ago, you gave me some time, just to chat through what I was thinking about for my future, what kind of roles you saw coming up. And I would encourage any candidate who's thinking about some future moves, even if it's a year away, people like Julie and Josh Bembridge, who's on this call, who did the recruitment for Newham, you're always on the lookout for people who might be kind of thinking about their next move. And it actually helps, I think, employers who are looking for a more diverse pool for you on the Penna side to know who might be out there. And I think, we can all help ourselves actually by putting our hands up a bit more and actually saying, do you know what, I want to advance, I want to take my next step up, I'm looking, and you're so generous. I know everybody at Penna is really, really generous with their time in terms of just providing a bit of intel about who might be hiring and what you need to do to kind of get there.
Yeah, it's mutual benefit, isn't meeting people, but I have seen a distinct improvement in panel focus on this and panel understanding. And just a quickie one, Lethem, somebody asked about the sort of place shaping and how you get people to feel place, and both Ian and Cambridge and Newham worked really hard, I think, to give a sense of place. But we've just done some really good work with Salford City Council, which Sam will attend to. They did a virtual tour as well online for the chief exec candidates and did an hour's walk around Salford. It was amazing. So if anybody's struggling with that, give us a call and we'll share their experience. I'll stop there, Lethem. I'm conscious. Spot on.
I think in July and August, when it was able to move a wee bit, more freely. There were people saying to me that, excuse me, they'd come down from wherever and driven around and had done it. The difficult bit was in meeting up and hotels and stuff like that, but it was still possible to get that. Maybe slightly different in terms of place for West Northants, because part of our challenge is to create that sense of place. We're bringing together Northampton, Daventry and South Northants to create a new place called West Northants, and one of the things we're looking for is someone to actually be the place shaper, working with the politicians. So and we found that person in the northeast, would you believe?
Well, thank you so much. A great way to stop. Anybody, you know, as a person from the northeast, it's always great to hear that you found some more great talent from the north of the country, Ian. And thank you all for giving your time. So
one from Sunderland and one from somewhere up that direction.
Durham.
Well, that's even better. My home city. Yeah. That's great stuff. Today has been absolutely packed full of innovation and creativity, hasn't it? And this week we launched the PPMA People in Excellence Awards. Great examples of what we're looking for to show what you've been up to out there in the world of HR and OD, really pushing your own boundaries, challenging the way things have been done historically, traditionally, and really showcasing the best of what's happening out there. Also, we referenced Salford. We've got those featured on our webinar next week, so check in for that and find out more best practice learning. On our website, and this was a message that picked up from Ian and Piali about the use of technology for candidates. We've got a brilliant webinar that we delivered last year. For those who are PPMA members, you can access all of our back catalogue. So check that out, because there's some great hints and tips on there for you to check into. And all I need to say once again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Check out our webinar next week with Salford, and also any creativity, innovation that you're up to, feel free to check out our website. Full details about the awards are there. And in the meantime, go well, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you on a future program. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone. See you soon. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.